Okay, so you want to own a data center. Buy some land, put up a windowless building, fill it with servers, and rent out the space to companies who need somewhere to store their information. No customers walking through the door, no inventory going bad, no staff to manage on a Friday night shift, just racks of machines humming quietly, generating rent 24 hours a day. It sounds like the cleanest business on earth. And it is not entirely wrong. Data centers are, by several measures, one of the most profitable real estate categories that exist. The problem is what it costs to get in, what it costs to keep running, and why some of the best-funded companies on the planet have poured billions into projects that sat half-built for years before generating a single dollar of revenue. You are not building a warehouse with computers in it. You are building a piece of industrial infrastructure closer in complexity to a power plant than to an office building. There isn't one type of data center either. At the bottom end, you have colocation facilities, where you rent rack space and power to companies who bring their own servers. Above that sits the wholesale data center, leasing entire buildings to a single tenant on contracts running 10 to 15 years. Above that, the hyperscale facility, the kind built by or for companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, sometimes exceeding 1 million square feet. Each of these is a different bet on the same question. Do you make your money from many small tenants, or one enormous tenant locked in for a decade? That single decision shapes every other number in the business, including who you're even allowed to compete against. A hyperscale developer is often writing the entire business plan before a single acre is purchased, betting hundreds of millions that one specific company will need exactly this capacity, in exactly this location, on roughly this timeline. Guess right, and you have a tenant locked in for 15 years before the building is finished. Guess wrong, and you own an enormous, extremely expensive building that almost nobody else on Earth has a use case for. Here's where the naive mental model breaks down. You think the expensive part is the building. It isn't. The expensive part is the power. Before you pour a single foundation, the first question isn't, where's the land? It's how much power can I actually get here? A single hyperscale campus can require 100 to 300 megawatts, roughly the demand of a small city, and utility companies don't have that sitting around waiting to be switched on. In Northern Virginia, which handles an estimated 70% of the world's internet traffic on any given day, some developers are now told their facility won't get grid power until the early 2030s because the queue for substation upgrades is years long. That single fact, not concrete, not steel, is currently the biggest constraint on how fast this industry can grow. Once power is secured, the build-out begins, and the naive budget falls apart. Electrical infrastructure, transformers, generators, backup power systems can account for 40 to 50% of total construction cost. Cooling is nearly as critical, since every watt that goes into a server rack eventually becomes heat that has to go somewhere, or the equipment fails within minutes. Newer facilities built for AI hardware are increasingly moving to liquid cooling because air alone can no longer keep up. A single hyperscale facility can cost $500 million to over $2 billion to build, and that number keeps climbing as racks get denser. Add in security, biometric access, man-traps, round-the-clock guards, all contractually required by tenants, and redundancy. Since data centers aren't built to work, they're built to fail safely. The industry's tier rating system runs from Tier 1, a single point of failure, to Tier 4, where every system has a full duplicate ready to take over instantly. A Tier 4 facility can cost 2 to 3 times more per square foot, and most serious tenants won't sign anything less than Tier 3. Here's the trap that catches inexperienced developers more reliably than almost anything else. You can secure the land, the power commitment, and assign tenant, and still lose the project because of interconnection delay, the years it takes a utility to actually build the grid connections your facility needs. One widely reported Northern Virginia campus sat fully built and fully leased, empty for over 2 years, because the utility couldn't deliver promised power on schedule. The building was done, the tenant was signed, the revenue was zero, every month bleeding pure interest expense. Ireland tells the same story at national scale. Data centers grew to consume nearly a fifth of the country's electricity, and the grid operator simply froze new connections around Dublin. You can win every part of this business and still lose if the power isn't there. So how does the money actually work? Colocation facilities charge by the rack, plus a quieter stream called cross-connects, fees for direct cable connections between tenants, which becomes pure recurring revenue at almost no added cost. Wholesale and hyperscale deals are long-term leases where the tenant pays for guaranteed power capacity, whether they use it or not, the data center equivalent of an airport's minimum guarantee. That structure is exactly why data center REITs like Equinix and Digital Realty trade at 20 times earnings or higher. Tenants almost never leave once their servers are physically installed, so the income is remarkably stable, and pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and private equity are now competing directly for these portfolios. But the story isn't simple anymore. Artificial intelligence just triggered the fastest demand shift in this industry's history. AI chips consume 5 to 10 times more power per rack than standard servers, making huge swaths of decade-old capacity functionally obsolete for the fastest-growing part of the market. Retrofitting can cost nearly as much as building new, and sometimes the building simply can't receive more power because the real constraint is the substation half a mile away. That's pushed some of the largest tech companies toward building their own power generation, including direct deals with nuclear plant operators, effectively becoming their own utility. That boom has made land and power the new beachfront property. Rural counties are being courted with tax breaks in exchange for hosting the largest structure they've ever seen, while local governments push back over water usage that can run into millions of gallons a day, and over noise from cooling equipment that never stops, because a data center never really closes. Some projects have been rejected outright at zoning meetings, which means even after solving land, power, and financing, you can still lose at a town council meeting. And there's a cautionary case every serious developer studies. In the mid-2010s, several cloud providers signed enormous leases, speculating on demand that hadn't materialized yet, leaving facilities underleased for years, generating just enough to cover costs but not enough to justify the construction loan. The lesson isn't that the demand story was wrong. Global data consumption has grown every year for decades. The lesson is that timing a multi-year construction and power procurement process against a demand curve that can shift in 18 months is one of the hardest forecasting problems in commercial real estate. So what does it actually cost to get in today? A modest colocation facility might run $20 to $50 million, still out of reach without institutional backing. Hyperscale campuses run into the tens of billions per site, financed by corporate balance sheets the size of sovereign wealth funds and, increasingly, private credit funds that have poured hundreds of billions into this space, betting that guaranteed lease income is nearly as safe as debt gets, provided the power actually arrives on schedule. And that's the entire story compressed into one sentence. A data center is not a technology business. It is a power procurement and real estate business that happens to have servers in it. The dream is real, the demand is real, and the companies that got the timing right have made fortunes doing exactly what you imagined at the start of this video. But the businesses that get the timing wrong don't fail because nobody wanted what they built. They fail because they finished the building 2 years before the power ever showed up. And in this industry, a finished building with no electricity isn't an asset. It's just a very expensive, very quiet, very empty room.